Welcome to episode 2 of Spectacle Science, part of Ethics Unfiltered. Colossal Biosciences has a plan to fight climate change, and at first glance, it's ambitious, imaginative, and oddly heartening. It says, the planet is changing, and we need bold ideas. So, here's theirs. Bring back the woolly mammoth, sort of, and use it to preserve permafrost in the Arctic. They want to gene edit endangered Asian elephants to be cold tolerant, give them mammoth-like traits, shaggy fur, insulating fat, and release them in the tundra. The idea? These hybrids will stomp snow and help replicate Ice Age ecosystems that kept the ground cold for thousands of years. On one hand, it's a compelling story. It taps into something hopeful. It makes climate change feel like a problem we can out-innovate. But once you start tracing the steps they need to take, it starts to feel a lot more like a story than a strategy. Today, we're breaking down what this project actually proposes, what it skips over, and why your gut feeling that something's off? Yeah, it's valid. Colossal's argument is this. Woolly mammoths used to help maintain tundra ecosystems. Their movement, grazing, and snow stomping compacted snow, which allegedly helped keep permafrost colder. When they vanished, those ecosystems changed. So Colossal wants to recreate that function, not with real mammoths, but with cold-adapted Asian elephants carrying edited mammoth genes, a concept they call functional de-extinction. It's not about nostalgia, they say. It's about ecological restoration, conservation, just with CRISPR. And if we steelman that pitch, it's hopeful, creative, charismatic. But even if we assume good intent and solid science, it still doesn't hold up. Let's follow their logic. Snow insulates the ground. If it's fluffy and full of air, it traps warmth. Mammoths, or elephants, could trample it, making it denser and less insulating, theoretically letting more cold reach the soil. That's their argument. And it's not technically false, it's just not enough. Because for compacted snow to matter, you still need deep, sustained cold. And climate change is making winters shorter, milder, and wetter, especially with more rain and snow events that accelerate thaw and destroy ground structure. This isn't just a question of insulation, it's a question of instability. And snow trampling doesn't fix systemic warming. It doesn't touch emissions, it doesn't reverse global jet stream shifts. Frangel Island was the last refuge of woolly mammoths. No humans, no major predators, and still, they died out. Not because of overhunting or sudden catastrophe, but because their environment changed around them. The climate warmed, genetic diversity collapsed, and the very conditions they needed to survive disappeared. That was 4,000 years ago. The planet was already warming, but nowhere near the pace we're seeing now. So if the original mammoths couldn't persist under those gentler changes, it's unclear why their modern proxies, gene-edited elephants unfamiliar with Arctic terrain, would fare any better. Let's zoom out. The Perito Moreno Glacier in Argentina was long seen as one of the few stable glaciers in a rapidly melting world. It was advancing while others were retreating, a glimmer of hope. But even that glacier is now shrinking. And that is ice that's been accumulating over thousands of years, in an ideal location, protected by elevation and geography. If even that system is starting to fail, then the idea that elephant-shaped snowplows can meaningfully counteract Arctic warming is optimistic at best. Let's shift from climate to care. The animals being edited here aren't fictional. They're Asian elephants, already endangered, heat-stressed, and struggling in their native ecosystems. And now, We want to gene edit them for Arctic survival and relocate them to landscapes they've never encountered? There's no published data on what that would do to their behavior, reproduction, lifespan, or stress levels. No intergenerational modeling, no plan for what happens if they don't adapt or if they suffer. This isn't conservation. Conservation supports existing species in viable habitats. This is rewilding without a map. It assumes a niche exists and that we can drop a modified animal into it and hope for the best. At best, it's a speculative intervention, and at worst, it's an open-air experiment on non-consenting sentient animals conducted without full knowledge of the risks. Here's where things get quieter. Governance. In theory, gene-edited organisms released into the wild should go through biosafety protocols. There are international frameworks for that, like the Cartagena Protocol. But the US isn't a signatory, which means Colossal doesn't have to submit their work for international review. There's no mandatory public oversight, no required ecological modeling, no safety net. If one of these animals escapes, breeds, or disrupts an ecosystem, there's no formal accountability process, just internal ethics advisors and press releases. And that's not oversight, that's marketing. You can't call something a proof of concept and bypass ethical review. Once your idea grows a heartbeat, you're in bioethics territory. And this project hasn't gone through any visible third-party ethics board. In research, even low-risk interventions like eye drops go through IRB scrutiny. Animal studies require welfare protocols. Public risk research requires published plans. This doesn't have any of that. No transparency, no third-party review, no plan for worst-case outcomes. And that's not just oversight, it's a conscious gap. This isn't just an administrative checkbox. It's about protecting life, anticipating harm, and creating systems of accountability. When there's no review, there's no safety net, and no one empowered to say stop before the damage is done. I don't think this project started with bad intentions. I think it started with ambition, with a desire to do big, something that could inspire action. And honestly, I understand that impulse. Climate change is overwhelming. It feels too big, too slow, and too out of reach. So the idea that we could fight it with something powerful, ancient, and awe-inspiring, a mammoth-shaped answer to a world on fire, that's tempting. It feels mythic, cinematic. It makes you want to believe. But belief isn't what gets us out of this. Science, policy, collaboration, they're what get us out of this. What climate work actually looks like is not this. It's not woolly elephants and startup videos and branded hoodies. It's spreadsheets, glacier models, soil sampling, reforestation protocols, indigenous land stewardship, emissions enforcement, carbon accounting, boring, technical, deeply important things. When we elevate spectacle over systems, we distract from the work that does make a difference. And worse, we risk turning real animals, real ecosystems, and real scientific trust into set pieces for a story we haven't thought all the way through. None of this happens in isolation. Every choice we make with genetics, with species, with rewilding, has a ripple effect. And when the consequences are unknown, or unknowable, the ethical responsibility grows exponentially. I'm not anti-genetic engineering or anti-ambition. I believe in the power of science to heal, to transform, to save lives. But real innovation includes restraint. It includes accountability. It includes the humility to ask, are we ready for this? And what happens if we're wrong? This project has brought people into the conversation. It's made climate a headline. And that's not nothing. But the solution we're being offered isn't grounded in evidence or ethics or governance. It's grounded in aesthetics, and that's not enough. If this proposal crossed my desk, it wouldn't be a hard no. But here are the questions that would need to be addressed. First, define your outcome. What specifically are you trying to achieve? Not in slogans, not in metaphors, but in measurable, climate-relevant outcomes. What does success look like, and what happens if you don't reach it? Second, account for the organism. You're not building carbon sensors, you're creating modified elephants. What modeling do you have for their health, behavior, reproduction, and long-term adaptation to Arctic climates? Third, detail your ethics and oversight plan. Which independent board reviewed this? What's their relationship to your funders? If your internal ethicist is also your chief scientist's co-author, that's not independent review, that's academic cross-pollination with a press badge. Fourth, identify your ecological risk. Where exactly will these animals go? What's the biome? What species currently inhabit it? What happens if the hybrids compete, displace, or destabilize the ecosystem they're placed into? And fifth, prove you're ready. Have you modeled a generation's worth of consequences? Have you built safeguards into the release process? Is there a stopgap if something goes wrong in year 5 or year 10? If not, this isn't a concept, it's a live experiment waiting to spiral. This proposal is imaginative, but it is incomplete, under-reviewed, and under-regulated. It doesn't meet the standards we require from any serious research involving live animals, ecological release, or gene editing. And it certainly doesn't meet the ethical thresholds we apply to public risk biotechnology. This isn't a rejection, it's a demand for revisions. Because if you're rewriting the genome of a living, breathing animal, you don't get to self-regulate. You don't get to substitute narrative for science. You get reviewed, just like the rest of us. I'm Chippy, and this has been Spectacle Science, a series within Ethics Unfiltered. We've entertained the dream, now let's talk about the systems that should have kept it in check.